Welcome to the S2 Cognition podcast. S2 is the official cognitive evaluation in sports, from youth to pro, where athletes and coaches build to win.
Today on the S2 Cognition podcast, we are joined by veteran basketball coach Ryan Pannone, who currently serves as the Alabama men's assistant coach. We dive into how S2 testing helped unlock innovation in his coaching by targeting specific areas for improvement and designing more efficient drills. He also discusses his approach of teaching, drilling, reading, and playing to develop players' decision-making abilities, and emphasizes the importance of making mental mistakes in real time and then learning from them. Additionally, we touch on the need for self-correction and the importance of building flexible brains and creating opportunities for players to improvise and find rapid solutions. For those that are new here, welcome. We're excited to have you today. And those that are returning listeners, we always appreciate your support. To help continue our growth, we ask that you subscribe, rate, and review the show, and share with a coach. Thanks again to Coach Pannone for taking time during his insanely busy summer college hoops schedule. We hope you enjoy. Coach Pannone, thanks for joining us today. I really quickly just want to run through some of your credentials just as a basketball coach. You've coached pretty much at every level, AAU circuit, college, now professional hoops. You were in Angola, China, Germany, Korea, Slovakia, and then most recently with the New Orleans Pelicans, which is where we met. Now you're an assistant coach with Alabama. I set on a 2025 championship. Can you summarize what a journey it's been for you up to this point?
It's been an incredible journey. You even left off some stops. So for me, it was high school, AAU, junior college, China, D-League as an assistant back when it was called the D-League, Germany, Israel. I spent some time in South Korea, Slovakia, back to Israel, G-League as a head coach, NBA, and then now fortunate to be at the University of Alabama. And so my path is unique. And it's interesting because I think for all of us, right, as we're going through our path, we're going through our career, there's times of frustration, times of when you wonder why your career hasn't taken that next step, or maybe your company hasn't taken off. And then obviously as you're going through it, and if you're fortunate enough to reach a level where you feel like you're currently progressing in your career, you're able to look back at how all of those experiences help shape you and define you and turn your business either to what it is now or who you are as a coach. And so I'm extremely fortunate to have the experiences that I have, even though it's a path that most people wouldn't choose and most people wouldn't go through, especially if they knew the salary I made at those places. So very fortunate to be where I am now.
Yeah. And you and we got connected, what was that, 2021? When you were was it D-League or was it G-League when you were the head coach of the squadron?
Gatorade came in and sponsored us, so it was good. Life was a little bit better in the G-League than the D-League.
Yes. Okay. So we get connected in 2021. I'll save the story of the setup. That's, for another time. The actual setup of testing is one of the funnier setups we have in that room at the hotel. That's again for another time. We evaluated your roster, and then we had meetings to review how your players are uniquely wired to make split-second decisions. Why were you so interested in learning about how your players process information?
For me, I've always set out on a goal to try to be the best coach that I could possibly be. And for me, it's how do I in my first year in the G League, I was hired. The New Orleans Pelicans were looking for an American international coach. And I came in with the mindset that I wanted to play more of a European style of play. It's part while I was hired. The European style of play is more complex offenses in terms of length of the type of sets that you're running, the complexity of the sets that you're running. And then there's a lot more player movement and ball movement. And when I got hired to the G League, we were a team that was an expansion team. So we had a group of G League guys that basically other teams didn't want. And then for our Exhibit 10 players, we had essentially all rookies. And so my first year, we struggled. And then I was put into an environment of a 7-day preseason. So I was coming from Europe where you have 8 weeks to train your team. And we were bad. The style of play that I wanted to play, which was very European, conceptually, we were bad. The makeup of it was bad. And so the pandemic hit, and I became obsessed during the pandemic of 2 things. Okay, how do I, within a 7-day training camp, teach players to play the way that I envision offensively, and how to attack switching defense, which is a whole separate conversation. But for the purpose of this, I became obsessed with how can I become a better teacher? How can I get players to make more complex decisions, to have spatial awareness? Because that's the way the European game is played. That's the foundation of the game. And so I became obsessed with trying to study it and research it and spent some time just out of curiosity. I think most coaches get in a comfort zone and this is our style, this is who I am as a coach, and they're not curious. And for me, I try to be very curious. So I spent a lot of time with Jenna Rosen. We spent one night in Vegas at Summer League. I think we were up to like 3:30 a.m. in a hotel lobby talking about this. And everything that you guys were testing, I just became so excited because it's like, all right, how do I do a better job? Like I'm asking my players to do something that either mentally they're not capable of, or I'm not teaching them the right way. And I always try to think of the analogy of this, right? Like if we go to a weight room and you ask me to bench press 300 pounds, who's stupid? You or me? Like you're asking me to do something I can't do. You're not creating an environment of growth and success that can allow me to accomplish this. And I felt at times that's what I was doing to my players. You know, the lack of their success, I look at myself. How can I better teach this? How can I create an environment to accomplish what I'm asking them to do? And am I doing everything that I can possibly do as a coach? And if the answer is no, okay, I've got to find the solution. So I became really enamored with talking with Jenna Rosen, who's the director of mental performance of the Pelicans, of what your company was doing.
She's arguably the nicest person on the planet. Okay, Scott, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, she is the nicest person on the planet. Coach, in some ways you're just guessing because you don't know what is going through the mind of an athlete. And so that frustration that you just described so eloquently about, is it me or is it my players? You don't really know unless you can quantify and measure some of those variables, one side of those equation, right? You're kind of a self-reflecting coach, so you're always looking at ways to improve. So your players take the S2 evaluation. Now you have this glimpse, this insight into the unique ways they process information. How did that open up and help you better understand and make adjustments as a coach equipped with this new insight?
Well, I think for me, the foundation of my coaching career began in player development. And I was fortunate to work for who I believe is the best player development coach in the world, an amazing teacher by the name of David Thorpe. And he was constantly obsessed with getting players to understand the picture and the message he would describe. And the way that I would describe him as a player development coach is, I think for all coaches, right? You have con artists, you have sketch artists, and you have artists. A con artist is just a guy that sells you a bunch of crap. Sketch artists, people that just, do a quick sketch of you. It's in black and white. And an artist, they can color in the details. The little finer brush strokes and all the little details that go into it. And for me, I want to be an artist as a coach. I really want to coach the details. I want to figure out how players learn. And it was something that I learned through him. The way that he coached each individual player was different. So he's got a background in psychology. That was his degree in Florida. And the way that he would communicate with each player, the way that he would coach each player, the way that he would teach each player. And getting the data from S2 was extremely important for me because I believe that as a coach, the way that I would communicate with each player was different. The way that I would coach them was different. I know without having a test, the way players learn is different. And I could have a feel, right, for what players were struggling with, but I could never have the data. And it's like people say all the time, it's the equivalency of being like, he's a pretty good shooter. What does that mean? Is that 33%? Is that 37%? Because it's only 4%, but that's huge. And for me, right, like I could tell, okay, he struggles with this, but I couldn't put an exact number on it, and I couldn't define necessarily with each individual player, which wouldn't allow me to target their individual learning, their individual development, the way that we scale their player development, the way that we scale their learning. And having the data for each individual player for me allowed me to do my job better. And if I, as a coach, can't coach you the best way that you need to be coached and the best way that you learn and the best way that your brain is wired, I'm not doing my job. I'm being a con artist, or I'm being a sketch artist. I'm not being an artist. And so the data for me help allow me to be better at my craft. And I'm a huge believer in it. I mean, I think about it all the time, from the way that we design drills, the way that we design our player development, to the way that we design practice and everything that we do.
And that leads me to the very next question I had was, okay, so we get introduced, your players take the evaluation, and then you allowed us to come to practice the next day. And we were working through drills and concepts. What are some of the ways that S2 helped unlock the innovation? Because you're a very creative coach. Like, I've gotten to sit in on some film sessions, and I've gotten to see your cut-ups. I know you're a film junkie. You're a very creative coach when it comes to what plays are going to work and how we create space and how do we design space. What are some of the ways that S2 help unlock or identify some of that creativity that now you can really target these players and know what's going to be more efficient for which player?
Well, I mean, it's interesting, right? Like we had tested a player of ours. He had taken a lot of highly contested threes. He was like 49% from three without taking these highly contested threes. And on the coaching side, you think to yourself, why in the heck does he keep shooting these? And you're one, like, just attack the closeout. And for me, it's simple, right? Like, I see the defender, I'm watching on film, I process the information. Yeah, just attack the closeout. And you guys would come in and you test them. And I wanted to hear what you guys were saying. And you were telling me, it's like, yeah, he can't see that defender. Right. And so it gets back to analogy. Okay, I'm getting upset at him for something he literally cannot see. And once again, who's wrong? Like, I'm yelling at him, attack the closeout. And he can't see it. So I'm asking him to do something he can't do. So now, by having that data that we were able to take from you and communicate through practice design, as you're telling me, like, hey, this is a great way to train this, and implementing that drill into his player development. And, we talked about it the other day. First, 12 times he got it wrong?
Yeah, it was like a visual read, right? It's not right to put a finer point. It's not that he couldn't see. It's visually, it takes his brain a little bit longer to process what's happening. And so in that space and time, it's just going to take him a little bit longer. And so we put him in that visual conflict drill that you wanted to work on, shoot, no shoot decision. And he made the wrong decision like the first 8 shots. And you saw a real pro making the wrong decision, which is really, to you, an elementary decision. Shoot when open, don't shoot if you're not open.
And it helped in a lot of ways, right? It helped within the individual player development design for each player, right? If we're targeting player development, how do we make this specific player better? And then within our drill designs, how are we making our team's ability to recognize and make complex decisions, build complex decision making, build spatial awareness, which are the foundations of how we wanted to play offensively. And so having you guys come in, watch practice, give feedback, and give adjustments to the drills that we're doing within our practice design was instrumental. And if you look at the success of that season, we had the second ranked offense in the league. And a lot of our players had career years in terms of efficiency. It was extremely helpful for our success, but also the individual success for our players. And we could see them and we could see our team really growing in those areas.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to add on to that was what, if we're trying to reduce, the performance mistake. So what is it? And Scott, you've talked about this a lot, the science behind, okay, so the performance metric is what? If the performance metric is we want him to shoot more open shots and shoot less contested shots, that is the performance output that we are trying to measure. And so how do you know that the drills that you're doing, currently work? And how do we be more efficient in taking those drills to isolate the decision that they're having to make in the areas at which they might be inconsistent? And I think that's the beauty of where your creativity, because Coach, you were already running all these drills, right? Those drills that we came in and saw, those weren't anything we had anything to do with. You already knew those drills. It was just isolating the decision making, no?
100%. And I talk about all the time. Players talk about how players come from Europe and their IQ is higher. And in Europe, they teach really good decision making. Like they're building decision making from a young age. Part of that is a shot clock, right? So they've got a 24-second shot clock in the youth ages, right? And here in college, we're still playing with 30-second shot clock, which is insane. So they're building decision within the way that they play the game, but they're building decisions within the way that they break down teaching pick and roll reads. And so we were doing a lot of that. It's something I learned in Europe and something I was able to steal and add to the teams. But then exactly what you talked about is in isolating what we're working on. And people will go into a weight room, right? And they'll isolate specific muscles, right? To target these specific muscles. And I think the information that we're gaining from the S2 testing allows us to isolate these specific mental skills that we're able to create these environments and allow growth to happen, right? So it's like on the physical side of the body, whether it's within the G League where you have a 7-day training camp, but then you also have athletic trainers that are telling you, hey, today's got to be a moderate physical day. Okay, today you can go hard. Today's got to be light. Everything that you do, you have to figure out how to be efficient. You don't have 3 hours within everything you do. And it's something we talk about all the time here at Alabama. Okay, how do we make what we are trying to do more efficient? How do we accomplish as much as we can within this individual drill of targeting these skills? And being able to be efficient, efficiency is king. And when you're trying to create marginal gains, I mean, think about it, right? Like the difference between this was 2 years ago, could be slightly different in the NBA this year. Do you know what the difference is between the best defense and the worst defense in the NBA?
Not off the top of my head.
It's roughly 4 stops per game.
Oh my goodness.
It's the difference. It's marginal gains. How do you create marginal gains? And everything that we're talking about within how the human brain works, how we receive information, how we perform and make decisions, and with the split second, can we slightly improve it? And if you look at guys that are coming over to the NBA from Europe, right? You have Jokic and Luka Doncic, and people are saying what? They're not athletic enough to play.
Oh, I'm going to get into this later. I am totally getting into this later. Yes.
Yeah, but I mean, it's like they're not athletic enough to play. They can't play in the NBA. They're playing against athletes. So what people don't understand is they physically may not be athletic as the NBA players, which for sure they're not. But their processing speed is so higher. And when you have these super long and athletic guys that process decisions slower, they become less athletic. When you have these slower physical athletes that can process information quicker, they become far more athletic. And the reality is, Luka and Jokic are great athletes. They're just not eye test athletes. You know, they don't have the vertical jump. They don't have the speed, but they're tremendous athletes. And for us, it's, okay, you're never going to turn a player into Luka. You're never going to turn a player into Jokic. But if you can make them 10% better at processing information, that's a marginal gain. I mean, we're talking about 4 stops. 1 stop per quarter is the difference between the best and the worst. It's incredible.
Yeah. You know, we always talk about physical speed plus cognitive speed equals play speed. There's some model in there where you're right. You need both. And if you can train both, we have conversations with young athletes and coaches of youth players. I mean, based on what you just said, why wouldn't we start training these cognitive and split-second decisions at a younger age? We're just going to build a better athlete overall.
I mean, it's when I got hired at Alabama, I went to go watch like some top 25 kids. And I was like, ooh, these guys can't play. It's like every year in high school, you've got these super highly rated guys, but they can't process information. And if you want to be an NBA player, you better be able to process information. Like you have to be able to think the game. And that's what the elite players are doing. And we spend all this time now at a youth age building athletic performance, speed and agility. And yet we can't think, can't process information.
Coach, I was going to say and I've had this conversation many times and I've gone on this rant before. Players have never been more skilled than they currently are. We've never had more shooters. We've never had better handles, and we've never had better athletes. And yet the game, I wouldn't necessarily call it. The game's not necessarily better, right? These guys get up to. Why do you think that is?
Well, so I'm going to give the layman's terms. You may have a more technical term, and for me, this is so interesting, right? Because I'm not well educated. I didn't graduate college till I was 26. I didn't grow up with great education. I could barely read and write. I'm basically stupid. And for me, it's the term of skill acquisition versus skill application. And you may have a better term than me, but it's the way that my brain works. And so exactly right. Like when I first got into the player development business with David Thorpe, it was all about skill acquisition. How do we teach players how to make these moves? How do we make their handles better? How do we make them better shooters? Now, as you said, today in modern basketball, these players are incredibly skilled, but they can't apply it within a game context. They have no skill application. Yep. And a big part of that is because now we're spending all this time on isolated ball handling drills against cones, isolated shooting drills without a defender or somebody contesting it. And our players, our youth, they don't go to the park and play 3-on-3. They don't go to the park, play 4-on-4. They're not playing 21. They're not playing 5-on-5 pickup. They're not at a park where, it's like if you lose, you're out. Or if you're playing with older people, when you take a bad shot, it's like you might be a little bit scared, because as you're a youth. And it's like even now we spend a lot of time in today's practice. We spend a lot of time in 3-on-3, and we kind of built up our reads. So we did it within cutting drills where we guided them. It's like, all right, we're going to overplay here, backdoor cut. Okay, we're going to get into the body and push you over the screen, tight curl it. All right, now you got to read that defender, make a decision. And we knew the cut was going to be open, but we wanted them thinking. Then we played them against our walk-ons. A little bit less athletic players to where decisions would be easier. And then we played the same against our players 3-on-3. We constantly built up the difficulty of decisions within what we're doing. And as we were thinking, as we were going through practice, you could see our guys thinking more, making isolated decisions because it's 3-on-3. The decisions are easier. As you and I talked about, how do we build out our drills for complex decision making? And all I could think about then is like, man, it's like, when I was young, we played 3-on-3 all the time, right? You just get 6 guys to go to the park and you get to make these decisions. And I think within the player development now is about skill acquisition versus skill application. And you've got a lot of people that are doing their player development, and there's not a whole lot of skill application within a game context.
And what's interesting? When you hear the word cognitive or cognitive science, you think, oh, geez, this is going to be complicated. But the reality is small tweaks to a drill, small changes introduce enough complexity and enough difficulty to be effective and challenging and helping athletes learn to make better decisions. You don't have to have this whole new complicated set of drills. It's about applying some basic principles for how these systems work in very small ways to produce those marginal gains you're talking about. I mean, for a coach who looks at this and says, "Man, this would sound great," what encouragement would you give in terms of don't be afraid to apply creativity? These aren't complicated concepts, but they are providing structure and kind of organization.
Well, I think about it all the time, right? If we could become a shooting team that's at 33% to 36%, it's very small. What's the difference between winning and losing? It's the difference between an average shooter and a good shooter. Mm-hmm. And when we can take these drills, as you're talking, we just had a small tweak. And the reality is the marginal gains out of it are so important for what we're doing. It's the same player with a player shot, right? Like you can make a small tweak and make a guy a better shooter. Like you don't have to get super complicated and totally restructure every player's shot. There's small tweaks that you can make within each player's shot to really drive up their shooting percentage. And for coaches that get scared off on the word cognitive, right? It's where the game is going. We all want our players to think quicker. And for me, I'm just a better coach with smarter players. I'm a better coach with players that make better decisions. It's very simple. Like the offenses I want to run, the defense that we want to play, how we want to play. I am a better coach with better decision makers. And people ask all the time, it's like, what's the number one thing I look for in a player? Like when I'm evaluating, IQ, feel. Because it's like a lot of the other stuff is easier to teach. And if we have this tool that gives us the data of where our players are struggling within their cognitive speeds or cognitive conditioning, whatever you want your term to be, why would we not take advantage of it and build it within all of our drills? And for me, I want coaches to think with the mindset of how do we build better players?
Yeah.
Right. It's like we spend all this time in the gym. High school coaches spend all this time in the gym with their players. They're so giving of their time. College coaches, pro coaches. Mm-hmm. Why would we not want to be efficient? Why would we not want to really maximize the time that we're putting in with our guys? And I think the cognitive piece of it is it's really what's going to take the game forward. And I think the coaches that adapt to it quicker are going to see the results, and they're going to really have a hold on their league, their conference, their division, because it's the way the game is moving, and it's what our players need.
Yep. And I mean, we just left, you were talking about the buzzword of decision making. I mean, we just left Vegas together, and that's all the meetings and people we talked to and coaches, everyone used the term decision making. So they're looking for it. What would you say to a coach that's trying to understand the value of getting their roster tested?
Oh, getting your team tested, getting your players tested gives you the data on really where to target their individual development, target how they learn, and target how they process information. And with each player. And I think most modern coaches today understand they can't coach each player the same. They understand each player doesn't learn the same. And now if you can really specifically target their individual learning development and how you are constructing your drills to target, let's just say you've got a star player who's a great scorer that can make decisions, and being able to be efficient within your drills and understand when you say he can't make decisions, what does that mean? Like, what is the actual definition, right? Like, that's a very broad term of decision making. And I mean, you guys test for so many different ways of decision making, whether we're talking complex decision making, is it spatial awareness, right? As you said, is it the visual conflict? So it's decision making is a very broad term, that we use as coaches, and we just hear someone else say, we want to drill decision making. We want better decision makers. It's what does it mean? And then how do you actually target it and build it? And I think this is really important because I struggled with this as a coach, and it's something, once again, you guys will have a better feel on this than I will within the way that the human brain works. For coaches that are trying to build better decision makers, teach complex decision making, messy learning versus block learning. And for me, when you came to a practice when I was a young coach, I wanted you to walk away from practice really impressed, right? Like, it was very militaristic. The players went from this spot to this spot to this spot, and they executed it. And man, it was a well-organized practice, and they ran everywhere, and it was like super structured. And it's like, even now we have days where we are turning the ball over left and right. And okay, normally in a game, we don't want to turn the ball over for sure, but we're trying to build these complex decisions. We're creating this conflict. We're trying to teach and put players in a position, in an environment of growth, and you can't have growth without mistakes and failure. It's the reality of it. And so I think for coaches that are looking at building their players, they have to understand how the human brain works and take your ego out of it. Because so many times as a coach, we'll walk out of a practice, we'll be like, man, that was a terrible practice. We're turning the ball over left and right. Yes, that's how they learn. Okay, if I make this decision, and if the defender's here and I turn it over, not good. Let's not make the same decision the next time. And of course, you're still going to have players that maybe they don't care or they're not trying to get better. But I think if you have players that have this intent and are intentional within their development and intentional within getting better, they're going to sit there and look, okay, if he's here, I throw this pass, it's a turnover. What's my decision within this? And that, I think, is so huge for coaches to be able to take their ego out of the way. And there's days that, and once again, you guys know way better than me, there's days that you feel like, man, practice was terrible. But actually, your team is going to get a lot better within those days, to where you have these great practices where every drill flowed seamless, And I think sometimes as coaches, we design drills like that. We have the practice design of like, all right, I'm going to have this drill into this drill into this drill, so it's a good day of practice, and there's no turnovers, there's no messy learning. And I know I was like that as a young coach, and it's been, really within the last 5 years that I've adopted that more and more. It's like, and I've encouraged guys, like, it's okay to make it's okay to make a mistake. That's how you learn. Let's not make the same mistake twice. Let's not make it 3 times.
It's interesting, right? Because there are certain connections between what you see and what you do that you have to rep. You have to build these stable connections in your brain so that you don't have to think about it in the game. You just see it and you react to it. But the game is messy, to your point. The game is unpredictable. There's violations of your expectancies. Things break down. Things can change in an instant. We also, in addition to building stable brains, we need to build flexible brains. And that's kind of was lost. There used to be this whole concept of errorless learning. You need to learn something by never making mistakes. And now we understand our brains that's not the most efficient way to learn. You need to rep for some stability, but you've got to build practice that creates opportunities to be flexible, to have things break down unexpectedly so you can train your brain to improvise, to redirect, to find rapid solutions. And if you never create those opportunities, you're going to create robots, if you will, that when stuff gets quick and complicated and unpredictable, you're just not going to have as flexible a system. So we need stability and flexibility as creative approaches in our coaching.
I try to use a term within my teaching, and once again, it's what I've come to believe. Some of it goes a little bit against some of the science, but for me, it's a teach it, drill it, read it, use it, play it method. We are going to teach the skill. This is a skill. These are the teaching points that go into it. To where it's a little bit more reps based, where you get comfortable. Maybe it's footwork within the skill. Right now, we're going to drill it with defenders. You are making this decision. This is a decision to make. There is a defender, so you have the feel of the defender there. Okay, now it may be decision one, decision two, and we've spoken a lot of time about this. Okay, the read it portion is now we're going to randomize decision one, decision two. And so we've taught the skill that you need to play it. We drilled the skill that you need to play it. We've randomized the decisions. Okay, now we add decision three, same, teach it, drill it. Okay, now we're going to read it, randomize decision one, two, three. All right, now we're going to use it in a small-sided game, which may be 3-on-3, 2-on-2, 4-on-4. Okay, now we're going to play it live, 5-on-5. And, it's like having that methodology has really shaped and I think helped improve our players within the way that we're looking. And creating those environments of learning and letting them know, like we have a saying, it's like the game is full of mistakes. And as long as your mistakes aren't effort-based or aren't selfish-based, we have an opportunity to learn and grow. If it's an effort problem and if it's a selfish problem, we're not going to learn and grow, right? If you're driving into three players because you want to score, that's a problem. If you drove into three players and you tried to pass and you turned it over, okay, we have to make that the visual decision quicker. What is our visual cue of when we make this pass? Yep. And I think it's so important for coaches as they're training and as they're making practice design, as they're coaching teams, to build that methodology in. And like I said, I'm sure there's probably a better scientific way, but it's certainly a way that I've begun to adopt with our teams, and even more and more as we connected within Birmingham. And the results for our teams have been really good.
Yeah, just to geek out just for a second before
we
get
geeking
to
out.
The final.
Give it to me.
Funny. Yeah, I know.
No, pull this thread. Pull the thread.
We have systems in our brain devoted to monitoring errors and to evaluating errors that we make in performance, and they come online as soon as we make an action and produces an unwanted effect, and they flag that and alert the brain and then trigger a motor adjustment. If you never give those error detection, error correction, evaluative systems an opportunity to help shape the system, you're missing an opportunity to create a more flexible performance opportunity. So mistakes, feedback on the mistakes, we need that in human performance to be able to learn to navigate, learn to move away from patterns of actions and decisions that can lead us to make more mistakes or continually make mistakes. We got to have those in order to feel and develop those corrective experiences. I think you're on to it, Coach.
You made a great term, right, of self-correcting. And I was recently asked, as I was meeting with some NBA coaches in Vegas, and we were asking, when do we stop a drill? All right, so it's like if we are playing and we call a play and the players don't execute the play, or if a player is wide open and they miss the read, do we stop or do we let them play? And our answer was, well, it depends what segment of practice we're on. Right? Mm-hmm. Are we working specifically on execution? And is it an execution drill that we do need to be able to execute this pattern exactly perfect while still making decisions within that, right? So it's if we're trying to run a play and, hey, this is a option and decision out of it that we're trying to execute, great, we can take advantage of that. If not, we're going to execute the play through, because in time within sports, you do need to be able to execute your play design. Or are we in a different segment of practice where it's a drill and we call it play? If we're in that segment of practice we call it drill and they don't execute the play or they miss the read, we want them to play on, right? Because you can self-correct, and there's still 20 seconds on the shot clock to create a positive outcome. And if every time I stop practice, I'm taking away the opportunity to self-correct, most of the time players are going to know, I missed it. Yeah, they're going to realize it late. He was open. There's a time to teach that afterwards, but how can you self-correct? How can you create, right, conceptual offense? How can you keep the flow? And we use the term from an offensive standpoint, right? We want to create an advantage, keep an advantage, use an advantage. And so if we created an advantage and we lost the advantage because we didn't make the right read or we didn't execute the play, well, we're also going to play against a really good defensive team that's going to take that option away. So what is next? How do we play after the play? How do we play? We play very random offense. Like, this is the way I would describe the way we play. We play random with purpose, random with spacing random with unselfishness.
Yeah.
And if you've lost an advantage, which is going to happen against a really good defensive team, now you have to figure out how to recreate an advantage. And I can't call the timeout. We can't stop and get set up for me to call a whole nother play. There's not enough time. You're going to have to solve the problem. You're going to have to figure it out. You're going to have to use your brains. You're going to have to make decisions. You're going to have to self-correct and play on. And, I think that's like so important within the way that we do practice design and getting guys to understand, like you can always show on film. So we tell them, it's like, we're going to let them play through the mistake because the game is full of it. And as long as they play through the mistake and the mistake wasn't effort-based and it wasn't selfish-based, we're okay. Create something new within the context of how we're trying to play. And then we can address the execution after. We can address the execution within the execution portion of practice.
Yeah, or film, right? I mean, you're gonna find it during your film review of practice. You're gonna be like, oh, and this is where you can highlight it either the following day or later that night.
We had a beautiful clip today that happened. Like we ran a play, player came off it. You guys would add some fancy term, and the guy was right in front of him and wide open. I mean, right in front of him. Like, all he literally had to do was just give the ball like this, just hand it off. And he was so focused on another portion of the play, he couldn't see the guy right in front of him. And we ended up creating a wide open shot later through some random flare screens. And it was great in our teaching point today. It's like, hey, both players were named Aiden. It's like, this is Aiden on Aiden crime. He's wide open. Give him the ball. But great job recreating a new trigger, right? Like creating a new advantage. Like, yes, we want to see this. He didn't try to miss him. It was not selfish. It wasn't intentional. He just missed him. He made the wrong decision. But then he made up for it, and he created a new advantage with something beautiful, and it was a wide open shot.
Well, I wanted to build on this, and I don't want to give too much away, but before we move into the last piece of your practice, one of my favorite things that you let me watch when you're building foundational decisions is that term of randomness and having to read and react and see and quote unquote feel where the defenders are in space. When you guys, go 2-on-1 in that full court transition drill, and then you bump that up from 2-on-1 to 3-on-2 and now 4-on-3. I mean, you're isolating that tracking ability, the players to broaden. You're putting more bodies in a smaller, more confined area. I would love for you to elaborate on that.
Yeah, you guys had a very fancy term for it. It was nice.
Is it violating his expectancy? Was it that?
Yes,
is it that
violating expectancy.
Okay. Right. And so when he expects A to happen, but we've talked about this entire podcast that it's random, it's dynamic. Players don't always make the decision they're supposed to make. And so what do you do when you catch them doing B instead of what A is supposed to be? You violate their expectancy. How creative, how fluid, how flexible are they in decision makers? But keep going. I didn't want to interrupt you.
As you said, and it's something I really learned from you guys, right? Where it's like, how are you building the complexity of the decision? The decision is easier 2 versus 1. Decision becomes a little bit harder 3 versus 2, a little bit harder 4 versus 3, a little bit harder 5 versus 4, much harder 5 versus 5. And so we're trying to create these environments and build the learning and decision making out to where they've got an understanding of, we have the term numbers advantage, right? So it's like, we want to create an advantage Well, there's a couple ways to create an advantage. A numbers advantage is the best way to create an advantage. But now when you create the numbers advantage, the decision within the numbers advantage is key. All right, there's a lot of
making
teams.
The right read.
Right. There's a lot of teams that get multiple 2-on-1 situations or 3-on-2 or 4-on-3 that make the wrong decision. And the advantage was created and they didn't keep it or use it. They lost it.
Right. Yeah, I love something. This is why I'm so excited to watch you guys play. And then I promise we will get to the next piece. But you had a guard call a high pick and roll, and a different guy came to come, screen for him, and he waves him off because your best defender had already swapped onto the player that was coming to set the screen, and your guard realized, I don't want to switch into a better defender. Why are you coming to set the screen? Do you guys practice those little pieces, or do you just let those random acts happen? Because that happens in a game, right? Bigs just come up, hey, I got a screen. I got a screen to help my player get open. But in reality, that's not always the advantage we think it is if the best defender has swapped onto that offensive player.
Absolutely. We talk about it all the time. We show it on film because with how random we play, it happens.
Yeah.
A guard will we play so fast, a 5 will be matched up with a guard early in transition. Then the 5 will come up to set a screen. It's like, no, they're going to switch that.
Right.
Right. And so when we talk about decision making, that's a decision. That is a decision. Who is guarding me? Who is guarding him? What am I doing? How will they guard this? And to be able to process that information as quick as possible. And so it's like we try to break down decisions within all the time. Like when we're talking about for our big setting screens, who's guarding him? Who's guarding you? So what is their personnel? What is our personnel? Who are you setting the screen for? What's his skill set? What's their coverage? Because all those things determine the angle of screen that you set. Do you set the screen? Do you hold the screen? Do you slip the screen? Right? There's a lot of decisions in each pick and roll at the highest level that is going to be made that your bigs have to make, the guys that are coming to set the screen, and also the guy that's coming off the screen. And so we talk about it all the time, like, what's their personnel?
Yeah.
What is your personnel? What's their coverage? These 3 things determine what you do when you're coming to set a screen, or if you come to set a screen at all. Why would I want the best defender to switch on to our best player?
That's exactly right. Okay, real quick, do you have anything to promote before we move into the next piece?
S2. S2 is a great company that they can come up. No, but I mean, it's like, this is the next level. Like I try to talk to people all the time, like, this is where basketball is going. And I think what the conversations we have had, I feel like I've tapped into like 1% of it. And within that 1%, I've seen a massive growth within me as a coach. And I've seen a massive growth within our teams. And like, I keep thinking all the time, it's like, I need to get to 2%. I need to get to 3%. I don't think there'll ever be a time I fully understand what you guys understand. But there are far more intelligent coaches out there than I am. And it's like some of these guys, like TJ Saint, who's now the head coach of the squadron, right? Like that guy could be a lawyer or a doctor or something. Like, I mean, I could be a stay-at-home husband or I could be a basketball coach. There's not much I can do in my life. And I figured out 1% and, like we talk about marginal gains. That's not a marginal gain. That's a massive gain. And the 1% I figured out. And for coaches to understand the value, like, of how much better this information, and we talked about it, right? Like, you guys provide the information. Okay, we have to figure out how to apply the information. And when you can figure out how to apply it and make your players better, like the opportunity for your team to improve, I think, skyrockets.
Yeah. Shout out TJ Saint.
I love
getting lunch soon.
I love what you just said, because it's exactly what we feel. We feel like we're just scratching the surface with decision-making in basketball and in our other sports, because it's going to take this collaboration between the geeky scientists and understanding of the brain with the basketball minds. The basketball minds, the coaches, the players, that's where the creativity will come. That's where the application will come. If we do our job and help with the principles and concepts, we're just going to see the evolution over this several years to come. I think we're just at the tip here, where coaches are applying these concepts in more and more creative way. The more they understand about how brains work and individuals are wired and how these processes link up to the game, the more the creativity and the innovation is going to happen. So that 1%, we're right there with you. I mean, this is going to be fun to be a part of this wave over the next few years.
Oh, it's going to explode. And what coaches don't understand, we have this mindset all the time as coaches, and it doesn't apply to real life, right? Like we work on it for a day and we're like, that didn't work. We work on it for a week. It's like, it doesn't work. You know what? I'm probably 20 pounds overweight. If I go to the weight room today and I work out for next week, I haven't dropped 20 pounds. Like it's not how things work. Like when you talk about investing in something, like this takes investment. This takes commitment.
Yeah.
And if you can invest and commit to it, the payoff is huge. And it's been huge for our teams. It's huge for our players. And it's huge for me. Like when I look back at how I was coaching and training players, I feel so stupid. Like all I can think is like, why wasn't I doing this 10 years ago? It's like, this is the methodology the top coaches really in the game, I think in all sports. I don't watch any other sports, but you guys would know. But this is the methodology that these elite coaches are using across the board. And it's a massive advantage because there's so many coaches that are like, cognitive, nah, we're good. Let's get to our 3-man weave.
I appreciate you saying all this. I did not anticipate you going down that rabbit hole. But the next transition is a couple questions that are random, funny, neither, both, that I just want to run through. Give me an NBA player that does not get enough credit and why they don't get enough credit.
Ooh, great question.
And don't tell me Drew Holiday. I know he doesn't get enough credit. Okay. I want a different player.
I think a lot of those guys, right? I mean, it's like we could go down the list of, and some of them are just now starting to get the credit. For a while, it was Alex Caruso.
Great example.
Sure. He's just now getting it. I mean, Herb Jones probably still doesn't get the credit he deserves. And when we talk decision making, a lot of times we think about that offensively. His ability to make defensive decisions is incredible.
Oh, yeah.
Like he is. I mean, his defensive processor is amazing. And his ability to think, navigate screen, who am I guarding, what's the angle of the screen, what's the best way to get around it.
Right? He's anticipating all of those things better than sometimes the offensive player is.
Oh, his defensive processor. He is super undervalued in my opinion. And people are really his value is naturally getting higher. You could throw Jose Alvarado in there. And obviously we're getting a little Pelicans this year.
Well, I mean, I'm realizing that how I described Drew might come off as a slight. He's so good that he is finally getting, I know he doesn't get enough credit. So I didn't want that to be a slight.
None of those guys still get enough credit.
I know. I mean, he's a very good player.
And I mean, I think Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is like starting. It's like I still don't think people realize how brilliant of a player he is.
Okay, he's in my top 5.
He's incredibly difficult to guard.
The stop, slow down, redirecting, body control, but it's not fully explosive. Oh, I know. I could talk to you about this for hours. Okay, who is the basketball mind you've learned from the most?
It's a tough question. I've been very fortunate to work for and be friends with unbelievable basketball minds. I've worked for some of the top coaches in the game of basketball. And I think I've learned from all.
Name some of them.
First off, David Thorpe, best player development coach I've ever been around. I got to work for him. In junior college, I worked for a coach named John Meeks. And this guy can coach his butt off, man. Like when we talk about execution, his ability to get guys to run a pattern perfect and execute the little options within the pattern were amazing. And it's like, it's really like when you watch UConn, right? Like they run these super complex offenses but they also execute all of the reads out of each offense. Like how you teach guys to do that it's amazing. Like they do an incredible job at UConn. I got to Germany. I worked for an American coach named Simon Cody. I went to Jerusalem. I worked for a coach named Simone Piangiani. Simone Piangiani he may still be, but up until recently, if not, he was the all-time winners coach in the history of the Italian League basketball. Guy won 6 straight Italian League titles, went to 2 EuroLeague Final Fours. We won the championship in Hapoel Jerusalem. And then I worked for a coach named Oded Katash, who's considered the greatest Israeli player ever by a lot of people. Denny Avia, obviously made it to the NBA. So did Omri Caspi. Oded had gotten hurt, but he's certainly top 3 at a worst case. And the way his mind work was brilliant. I mean, like the guy just saw the game different than anyone else that I've ever worked for. And, from there, obviously I got to work for Alvin Gentry, Stan Van Gundy, Willie Green, Nate Oates, are amazing. I worked for an American coach named Joe Welton in China. It's interesting, right? Like when you look at successful coaches, and I look at it like the way that players look at other players. They're like, all right, what made Michael Jordan good? He had this move. Let me add this to my bag. Like I constantly think about what makes this coach successful and what can I steal and add to myself as a coach. And I think I've worked for more head coaches than normal people within the length of my career. In terms of my years as an assistant coach, I've spent 9 years as a head coach. I've spent 11 years as an assistant, and I've stolen so much from each of them. They each had these qualities that made them great. That once again, you just find the smartest kids in class. Why are they smart? Oh, yeah, right down there. So, he put down A. I'm definitely going with A. Steal from all those guys and look smart.
So we had talked about, I want to add another question now that we've kind of run down this rabbit hole. Okay, so my opinion, take it for what it's worth. It might be worth nothing, probably not, is that the top 5 players in the NBA game are not American born, right? Back to your SGA point, I would include him in there. What is it about what they do, whether it's practice plan, whether it's, I know you kind of alluded to this earlier, is it some sort of drills in practice? Is it how they're taught film? Is it how they watch film? What is it about what the foreign born or other countries, how they're training or teaching that our Americans are not doing?
Well, one, I think there's a different emphasis at the youth level. And so the way that coaches
it starts with the youth level.
For sure. Absolutely. Yep. The way that coaches are trained at a youth level in Europe and the way that the coaching process works compared to the way that the coaching process works in America. An example, the American coaching system is if you want to become a coach, you go to college, you become a manager. You go from being a manager to being a GA. You go from being a GA to a video guy to assistant coach to a head coach. You've never coached a game. You've never coached a game of basketball. You haven't run a timeout, you haven't run a practice, you don't, it's the same thing as a player, right? Like as a coach, you're put in all these decisions that you've never been in. If you want to become an NBA coach, okay, you are a GA manager in college, you go to be a GA, you go from being a GA to a video guy, to an intern in the NBA, to a video guy, to a player development guy, to an assistant coach, to now a head coach you've never coached. Now, within the last couple of years, it's slightly changed. Within more former players are getting into coaching. Same thing, they become coaches. They've never coached a game. They've played the game, but playing the game and coaching the game is very different. And then now you have the use of the G League and the D League. And oftentimes when you take a look at these, it's more prevalent within college, but 3 of the 4 Final Four coaches were high school coaches. And when you take a look at these guys that were high school coaches, small college coaches that worked their way up, oftentimes they're extremely successful, especially when you take a look at a little bit of the tactical side, in that they've just been able to coach 1,000 games, make the wrong decisions, and figure out how to be better at it. To where some of these other coaches are coaching for the first time under the bright lights, and they're making these decisions and they make the wrong ones. It's exactly what we talked about as a player. They make the wrong decision. You drew up the wrong play at the end of the game. You made the wrong call to foul or not foul. and you learn and put it in the back of your mind, okay, I'm not making that mistake again. Well, by the time that happens, you're 3 years in and you don't have a winning record and you're fired. In Europe, you have to get a coaching license, right? So you got to get a coaching license to coach at a youth level. You coach at a youth level as a head coach. Okay, you have to get a coaching license to move up. So each age that you're trying to move up, you have to get a different license. And so it finally gets to a point to where you can be a professional coach. Well, you're a professional assistant coach, but you've coached as a head coach at the youth levels, more likely than not. And you may be an assistant coach for the pro team while being the head coach for the under 18 team or under 21 team. And so I think your quality of coaching becomes higher. And then I think the emphasis, right? Like America, Europe is a socialistic country, right? Everything is about the best of the people. The way that the game is played in Europe is it's about the team. Everything is about the team winning. Everything you do is about the team. The way that you train is about the team. The way that you play is about the team. America, right, we're taught as an individual, you work really, really hard. You work your tail off. You keep climbing the ladders of success. And it's the way that we train our players, too. We train our players very individualistic, where it's them and a ball. They don't make any decisions. And we encourage the individualistic society of our players, which has been great too, because if you look at the individual creativity that a lot of the American-born players have, right, it's spread that creativity to these individually talented players in Europe. But I think when these players come over from Europe and they've been put in all these decisions that we're talking about between the 24-second shot clock, the way that they drill pick and roll reads, drive reads, decision-making, because they're drilling it within the structure of their practices from a youth age. I mean, if you go and watch 14 and under team in Spain, they're teaching pick and roll reads that our college coaches aren't teaching. And there's a level of information because we're teaching what we know, right? And a lot of coaches, and you guys deal with this, we don't really crave knowledge, and we don't crave to learn the way that other people do things and the way that they teach it, and then how do we apply it to our beliefs. Like, you don't have to take everything. And so how many coaches do it? It's like, well, that's what my high school coach did. Well, that's what the college coach did that I worked for, so I'm going to do it. They don't know why they're doing it. I mean, how many coaches do you come across that don't have an actual philosophy on what they want to do? And within Europe, you may think you have a philosophy, and then you become a head coach to 14-year-olds, and that philosophy changes and develops, and it expands. You know, for me, between coaching high school, AAU, putting my team in youth leagues and fall leagues and summer leagues, I've coached 1,000 games that I've been able to make decisions in, and a lot of wrong decisions. And now I just try to figure out how to make more decisions. And so I think when you take that and you surround those foreign-born players with the individual skill and talent of the American players, plus the spacing that the NBA provides through the court design, the three-point length, and the rules that promote spacing within the NBA, it now allows those players that may not be as great physical athletes, they now have all this spacing to use their processors, pick you apart. I think that's a big reason why.
That was I expected a really good answer, and that was way better than I anticipated. He is Alabama's men's assistant basketball coach, Coach Ryan Pannone. Thank you so much for joining us today, man. There are so many nuggets that I hope coaches and players listen to this, have good takeaways, and I'm excited about to hear the results. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the S2 Cognition podcast. If you like the content we're putting out, please subscribe with that plus sign at the top of your app, leave a review about the episode, and share it with a few friends. You can follow us on Twitter at S2 Cognition and Instagram at S2.cognition. If you'd like to get in touch with the program or show, please visit our website at s2cognition.com/podcast. Thanks again for listening to the S2 Cognition podcast. I'm your host, Harrison Hunter, signing off for now. We will talk to you soon.